Hi there! Before I finally move on to the meat of this playlist, which is the quantitative language data analysis using R, there is one last critical topic related to R programming that you need to be familiar with, which is data frames. A data frame is an R object with two-dimensional tabular structure that includes columns and rows and can be thought of as R's native data type for containing data stored in spreadsheet-like files. That is, files created and edited within spreadsheet software such as Microsoft Excel or LibreOffice Calc. Rows are usually reserved for recording the observation or data points, and each column signifies a specific feature of the row or data point. It may be helpful to go through an example of how the vectors of the glc.sample package can be brought together to construct a data frame in R. In the previous videos, I've shown you how to manipulate the data on each of the vectors of the glc.sample package separately. Every time I had to demonstrate a new concept, I took one of the vectors and used it as a playground to drive the point home. Now you can think of all these vectors as vectors whose members are positioned horizontally. And if you think them this way, you can also call them row vectors. Now, if you transpose them, in other words, if you take their elements and place them vertically, one above the other, you can create a series of column vectors placed side by side. The rows of the data frame represent the second language learners of Greek, and each column of a row stands for a feature related to that specific learner. For instance, what the first row says is that the learner scored 13 out of 15 in the listening task, 13 in the reading task, 13 in the speaking task, 7.75 in the writing task, thinks that the level of her communication skills is very good, and her first language is Greek. Recall that these data include students that were put to the same class with second language learners of Greek in order to get proper teaching support, although they are native speakers of Greek. Note that the data type of the columns do not have to be identical. The first four columns of the data frame are numeric, and the last two are strings. In other words, this data frame is a rectangular data structure with 6 columns, which essentially means that each column has the same size. Let's head to RStudio to create a data frame and use R to inspect its basic properties. To create a data frame in R, you need to use the data.frame function. Its arguments are the columns of the newly created data frame. The order of the arguments corresponds to the order of the columns from left to right within the data frame. Let's inspect it with the view function. As you can see, R assigns the vector names as names to the columns of the data frame. To take a look at the first rows of the data frame, more specifically the first 6 rows, as with vectors, you can use the head function. And again, as with vectors, you can set its second argument to a different number and inspect the corresponding number of rows. For getting the last 6 rows of the data frame, there is the tail function. And again, you can obtain the number n of last rows of the data frame by specifying it as a second argument of the function. Let's assume that the data frame has a big number of columns, which is a pretty common scenario for language data analysis. From personal experience, I always use the names function to gain access to the names of the columns to see all features encoded in the data frame. So I think this is also a good tip to take away from this video. The output of the names function is a character vector with the column names of the data frame. For inspecting the size of the data frame in terms of rows and columns, the dim function outputs a numeric vector, whose first member is the number of rows and the second one is the number of columns. As you can see, the data frame has 100 rows and 6 columns. The last two functions for this video, nRow and nCol, are reserved for displaying the number of rows and columns separately. In the next video, you will learn how to inspect a data frame and extract specific cells out of it in various ways. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get notification when new videos are released.